Okay, we're live in the Facebook group. I'm here to take questions from the group regarding the CPS process. In every state, in every county and parish in the United States, there is a CPS designated social workers. In Los Angeles County, it's called DCFS, the Department of Children and Family Services. In other states or other counties, it's called something different. I think in Orange County, it's called the Social Service Agency, the SSA. But generically, nationwide, it goes by the name of CPS, Child Protective Services. And everyone, it's administrated at the state and local county level. So in California, it's administrated by the counties, but supervised by the state. In Arizona, it's administrated by the state. So they are all state employees. But generally, all these cases are heard in the state court system. In California, it's the Juvenile Dependency Department of the Superior Court. So in California, the Superior Court, the trial court, is divided up into many different segments. For example, we have the segment for criminal law, we have the segment for civil law, and the department for family law, and the department for probate, department for traffic, department for mental health. Well, there's also the juvenile department. And the juvenile department in California is divided into two separate sections. Juvenile delinquency, and that's for juveniles who have committed crimes, and juvenile dependency, and that is for children who have allegedly been abused or who are at risk of being abused. So what happens is that social workers act, sort of like police officers, and they go out and decide or protect children, so to speak, and they decide if a case needs to be started. Not always is a case started. Sometimes cases are done on a voluntary basis where they provide services to the family, and no case is ever started. We represent people in those situations as well, because there's an investigation. There is sometimes interaction with the social worker's attorney. So a lot of people and families that call me want to have an attorney represent them as well. I'll give you an example. Recently, a guy called me, and there was some issue with his children and the way they were relating to his wife. Allegedly, the wife had some type of substance abuse problem, and I think the oldest daughter said something to her therapist, and the therapist, being a mandated reporter, he or she thought that this should be reported to DCFS. Well, when DCFS got involved, they contacted my client, and he immediately looked around on the internet and found me and told me, hey, I don't want to deal with these people by myself, and I want you to be my attorney. Hold on a second. I want you to be my attorney. And so I represented him through that process. We had a series of meetings at the juvenile dependency, not at the court, at the CPS office. And I had to try to convince them not to file a case. My client felt, and probably rightly so, that it was an intrusion, it was embarrassing, and we did things to work it out where a case wasn't filed. And the Department of Children and Family Services was satisfied that a case should not be filed in court. Now, when they have a case that's filed in court, that raises it to a whole whole nother level. And in that case, you are basically summoned to court. Generally, probably in about 95, 99% of the cases, the children are taken away from the parents and placed in foster homes. Sometimes the child is placed with another parent, and the offending parent has to move out of the home. But generally, one or both of the children are being removed from the parent's custody and control. And the social workers can allege many different things: physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, child neglect. For example, I was dealing with a case today in Fresno County, and the social worker had filed a petition where she alleged that because of alleged past drug use, that my client was a risk to the children. So that's how cases start. Now, if the social worker comes knocking at your door, they can be, let's say, they can have a warrant, or they can be warrantless. Social workers are trained, and they call it to investigate child abuse. But I call it they are trained in manipulation, psychological and emotional manipulation. So if the social worker knocks at your door, first thing you should know is you don't have to let the social worker in. I mean, it's America, right? If she doesn't have a warrant, she doesn't get to come in. But in a lot of cases, people tell me social workers and the police show up and they feel compelled to open the door. Or if they open the door, the cop sticks his foot in the door and, basically forces their way in. No police officer or social worker or any governmental agent cannot come into your home unless they have a warrant, okay? Or a court order. Can't do it. It's America. It's a violation of the Fourth Amendment rights to the Constitution, illegal search and seizure. So my advice generally, and it's not an absolute, my advice generally is that you don't let them in the home unless they have a warrant. And as soon as they knock, you should probably be calling an attorney that practices in this area of law. Don't call a family law attorney. Don't call a divorce attorney. Don't call a criminal attorney. Call an attorney who represents parents and families in the juvenile dependency system. Sometimes they go by the name or the moniker in Google as CPS defense lawyers, or juvenile dependency lawyers, or child's court lawyers. But that's much different from the family law and divorce attorney, much different from the criminal attorney. The reason why it's important is because there are special rules and laws that apply to juvenile dependency cases. As a matter of fact, a lot of judges, and I think it's required in the California Rules of Court, if they don't know you as an attorney who practices in this area, they are supposed to question you and decide whether you have the ability to practice in this area and represent the parent. And if you don't, some judges will tell you, hey, you can't represent this parent. Some judges will tell the parent, I don't think Mr. So-and-so is qualified to represent you. Do you still want him to represent you? And if you do, you have to sign this waiver. And the waiver basically said, even though Mr. So-and-so is not qualified to practice in this area, you agree to allow him to represent you, and you can't use that, as a basis for appeal. In juvenile cases, if a parent has an attorney that is not qualified, they have an argument on appeal called the ineffective assistance of counsel. All right? It's called IAC. And even if you are qualified and you are ineffective in the case can be thrown out and start over again. So the judge wants to make sure right from the beginning that, if Mr. So-and-so is not qualified, that, you waive your right to basically argue ineffective assistance of counsel at the time of appeal if you were to lose. Now, I represent people all over California, and, a lot of times I'll go to a county where, they don't know me, they've never heard of me, nobody's done any research about me, and the judge asks me, "Hey, Mr. Davis, I'm not familiar with you. Are you qualified under the California Rules of Court?" And, I'm thinking in my head, how am I going to humbly explain to the judge that I am qualified? This happened in San Diego recently, San Diego County, and I think I knew all the other court-appointed attorneys and even the social worker's attorney. I had done cases with her or against her in the past. And I started speaking, and she interrupted, and she said, "Your Honor, Mr. Davis is well qualified. He's been in this court, in this county, on many cases in the past." And so the judge, stopped and said, "Okay, I'll take that representation. Thank you, Mr. Davis. You don't have to explain your qualifications." But it's very important that you call a qualified attorney when the social worker knocks at your door. Now, many, many people call me and tell me, "Hey, Mr. Davis, I talked to the lady, I let her in, I thought I could, explain things to her, basically talk their way out of it." You can't do that with a social worker. Don't even think that you can do that. Social workers are highly trained individuals, and most of them are highly educated. Some have bachelor's degrees, some have master's degrees. Some have licenses in counseling and, therapy. These are highly, highly educated people and highly trained. So, if you think that you're going to out-talk a social worker or explain something to the social worker, ain't going to happen. Ain't going to happen. In criminal cases, you see on the movies the term lawyer up. The criminal suspect is questioned by the police, and the first thing he or she says is, "Hey, I want a lawyer. I don't want to talk to you." Well, I advise that in most cases that's the same thing people in CPS cases should do. And here's why. A lot of social workers and attorneys and sometimes judges, I get the feeling, don't like me to tell people this because it's not cooperating. We're here to protect children. I told a judge one time a few years ago, she actually said this to me. We were in her chambers with all the attorneys, and she said to me, "Mr. Davis, you're not being very helpful. You're not really allowing your client to cooperate with the social worker." And I kind of looked at her, and I looked around, to the other attorneys, and I said, in the most humble way, "Your Honor, I'm a defense attorney. I'm not supposed to be helping the social worker and her attorney prove a case against my client." And she says, "Well, that's not being cooperative." I apologize, Your Honor, if you believe it's not being cooperative. And then I said, "Well, Your Honor, do you think, you can still be fair in making decisions about this case because you think I'm not being cooperative?" But come on, I'm a defense attorney. I'm supposed to be representing my client to the best of my ability. So, when the social worker knocks, find a lawyer. And if they don't have a warrant, in most cases, don't let them in. You're not going to talk your way out of it, okay? You might have to let them in. And there are several ways a social worker can get a warrant. She has to, or he has to, go to a judge with a set of facts signed under penalty of perjury, saying that, the above is true and correct, and I swear to it. Now, I've had cases where those declarations are not quite accurate. Missing here, fact is misstated there, and sometimes I get the impression that, on these warrants and these declarations that these social workers write up, they're downright untruthful. So they can get a warrant to come into your house and to inspect it. Now, of course, I'm talking about the law here in California. I'll assume for those of you watching outside of California that this is also true. But it's always best to talk to a lawyer who is licensed in your state to make sure that what I'm saying is true in your state. So we're going to talk as if everybody watching is in California. So they can get a warrant to come inside your home and inspect your home. Look around. Look for the skeletons in the closet. That doesn't mean you have to talk to the social worker, right? It says they can look around, not talk to you. As a matter of fact, a social worker can never get a warrant to make you talk to them. Yeah, that's true. It's America. The social worker can also get a warrant to interview your children and to inspect them. Yes, it is true. They can take your child in a separate room without you being present and ask them all types of questions. They can also get a warrant to come and take your children away from you. And that's called a detention warrant. So if any of these things happen, you probably want to have an attorney on the phone with you. Since the pandemic has been going on, CPS has been very, very busy. Investigating people, taking children away from parents. And it's all over the state of California. I get calls, every day. And sometimes when they do this, they come with a detention warrant. You may not have time to look for a call, or look for and find a dependency attorney. So what you should do is probably do some research now if you don't have a case, and find a defense attorney, a CPS defense attorney, a juvenile dependency attorney, whose name and number you can call, get a quick, interview with that person, and then have their name and number like on the refrigerator. So if the social worker does call, you can call that attorney, and hopefully they can take that call and be on the speakerphone and work with you while the social worker and the attorney and the police are at your house. That's the best, I think, advice that I can give. It's prophylactic advice, of course, but it's well worth it. I mean, it's like you have a medical condition, and you have your doctor's card right up there on the refrigerator. So that is something that you should do. Try to find someone, and if the social workers ever come calling, you should call that attorney so you don't have to deal with the social workers by yourself. A lot of people, it's hard, I know, it's very hard to not talk to a person who has a court order to come in your house, or who has a court order to take your children, because you're freaking out. This governmental agent is in my house looking around, trying to talk to my kid, trying to inspect my kid's body, or is taking the children away from me, and then I start talking. Now, the only evidence a social worker can use against you, and the best evidence for him or her, is from your mouth. And you start talking. It's like the criminal defendant who, the police come and they use that good guy, bad guy, psychological ploy on you, and then all of a sudden, yes, I killed her. And then, of course, that will be used against you at your trial, and you'll be going away to state prison. Now, a lot of these social worker cases, these CPS cases, can turn into criminal cases. I hope you are all aware of that, because child abuse is a crime in every state in this country. So if somebody comes in because they allegedly beat the crap out of your kid, and you start talking, guess what? Guess who's going to be the star witness against you in your criminal case? The social worker. So, you need to lawyer up. Now, there's something that I want to mention to you, and I've gotten this call several times this week, and it's become crystal clear to me. Crystal clear to me. A lot of people call me, and they say, "Hey, Vince, this is what happened, and let me tell you all the wrong things the social worker did. Let me tell you all the wrong things the other parent did, who I don't get along with. Let me tell you this and that and this and that." And I patiently listen to your stories. But here's the thing. You have to focus on getting your children back, not on what the social worker did wrong. All right? There's time enough when you get your children back that if the social worker lied or somebody lied, you can sue them for civil rights violations. Okay? But when they take away your kids, that is not what's important. Recently, a guy called me and he said, the police came out with the social worker and they took my kids and they arrested me. And they started asking me questions. And they didn't give me my Miranda rights. And he believed that that was the key to his case. After listening to him for about 45 minutes, I said, hey man, I understand you felt you were done wrong, and we can address that after we get your children back, after we deal with your criminal case, okay? Because you got two cases. You got a criminal case, you got a juvenile case, two different judges, two different courthouses. So, let's take care of what's important first, and that's getting your children back. And then later, if you want to sue the social worker for lying or violating your constitutional rights, you can do that. But now's not the time to talk about it. I find myself telling people, there's two parents, one has the kid, one doesn't have the kid. I'm talking to the parent who doesn't have the child, and they're telling me all the bad things about the other parent. Why the relationship went bad, and why that person is a bad person, and why that person is, going to turn the kid against me, all that type of stuff. So let's not focus on that. Let's focus on getting your children back. And that has nothing to do about your old relationship with so-and-so and why he or she is, a bastard about, to live with and all that kind of stuff. So let's just focus. The other thing I find is that people start developing their own strategies. Now, this is really dangerous. Very, very dangerous. I told somebody, the other day, and I tried to do it as nice as possible. I said, listen, the strategies you're making in your case, they're almost all wrong. Well, Mr. Davis, this is what I feel. I feel in my heart. And I have to tell them, and I'm going to tell you, listen, unless you're an attorney with experience who's practiced in the CPS area of law, what you're probably strategizing is about 5% right. But that means you're 95% wrong. And you're making decisions based upon these strategies that you feel in your heart. Now, here's what I know. You have to have the education, the experience, the tools to be a CPS defense attorney. Regular attorneys don't even have that. When I first found out about CPS courtrooms and them taking away children from parents, I was an attorney, and another attorney told me, hey, Vince, this goes on every day. In downtown Los Angeles, and it used to be in the criminal courts building. And I told him, I said, hey, Michael, the government takes away kids from their parents? That's unconstitutional, my man. What are you talking about? And, several months went by, and I actually went down to a juvenile court where Michael was practicing as a court-appointed attorney at that time. And I watched, and I couldn't believe it. I was flabbergasted. The government really can take away your children. Yes, they can. Not only can they take away your children, they sometimes keep them from you permanently, and they let some strangers adopt the kids. And you and your family lose those children. A lot of people don't take this seriously. You know, they take it almost as if, okay, this can't be real. I'm going to get my kids back, right? Wrong. People are going, if you don't address these issues and you're not well represented, you could lose your children permanently. I get many cases where people call me, and then 6 months later, a year later, 18 months later down the road, they call me again. Hey, Mr. Davis, you were right. And now they're trying to adopt out my children. I mean, I never say I told you so, but that's what I'm thinking, right? And people, this comes to as a great shock to them because they don't think something like this could happen in this country. The Supreme Court of the United States has said that the family is the fabric of our society. Think about that. The fabric of our society. What more do people have than their children? I've represented people who didn't give a damn about going to jail, but their children were placed in foster homes. Oh no, that can't happen. And by the way, I want to tell you something. Early in my career, I used to represent foster parents. Yeah, used to represent foster parents when they get accused of abusing children. Now that happens in a whole different court system. It doesn't happen at the juvenile court, the CPS court. Nobody knows about it because foster parents sometimes abuse children. Now, I'm not saying there aren't any good foster parents. I'm not saying that. But, things happen. I remember I represented a foster parent who was accused of causing the death of a child. The death of a foster child. I don't know what those parents did to get their child taken away from them, but it couldn't have been as bad as killing the child or causing the death of the child. So, it's very important. People should do everything to try to prevent their children from being placed in foster care, or at least to try to get them out as soon as possible. Right? All relatives come together and, try to get the children together, out of foster care and placed with people that they know. Hopefully family that's, well-meaning and will take good care of your children. Today I did a case in another county by telephone, and one of the things that I presented, and this is a secret strategy, one of the things that I present or try to present when the children are in foster home is a list of 25 people who could take the children. And those people can live anywhere in the world, right? In the world. So in this particular case, before I represented the mother, the social worker told the mother, who she doesn't like, I'm not placing your children with any relatives. Now that's what my client said. I don't know what the social worker said, but allegedly that's what the client said, or that's what the social worker said. I do know there was a relative in the area that could have taken the kids and even asked to take the kids, and the social worker said no. And as it turns out, because I make a list of 25 names of friends and families that live anywhere in the world, about 10 of those people live right there in that city, not the county, live right there in that city. And, there had been, kids been in foster care maybe about a week, and nobody has gone out to talk to these people about placing the children with relatives. And I always wondered why that is. And I've done some research, and when I've come to the conclusion, it might be the wrong conclusion, but what I've come to the conclusion is foster parents, excuse me, social workers in the counties, not the social workers, benefit from the child being in foster care without a relative. And sometimes I think that it's used as a ploy, so to speak. Let me give you the example of what I mean. Children are taken into custody by the social worker. There are allegations against you, and the children are placed in a foster home. Now, you're entitled to have a contested hearing regarding the jurisdiction on the case, and you're also entitled to have contested disposition. But a lot of times I find social workers saying, well, when we get to the disposition hearing, we'll decide if the kids can go to a relative. What? Why do we have to wait to the disposition hearing? It's almost as if they use that as some type of leverage against you, so you don't have a trial, so you don't extend the case, and that you agree with everything they say, so the kids can go right to that relative that you've been wishing the kids to go to. Right? I did a case in a Northern California county where I came in maybe a couple hearings after the initial detention of the child and placement in a foster home. And every time I went to the court, I used to fight to have the child placed with a relative. Do you know that I had to bring in the relatives to testify because they had all been denied by the social worker? And after the social work, after the hearing, the judge basically said, why can't the children go with one of these relatives? Or why can't the child go with one of these relatives? So one of the relatives who had been denied was a very successful businessman and author, and he owned several businesses, and he had, because of his work, he had some type of secret clearance, and the was with the government. Actually, I think it was with like the CIA and the FBI and that type of stuff. And social worker wouldn't give him the child, and I just couldn't figure it out. Then he lived in another state. He lived in Nevada, right? In Northern California, Nevada is kind of close. It's right there on the border. I had another relative who was a woman who lived right there in the city, where this case was being heard, and they told her no. And they told her no because of what happened about 30 years ago. She was in a nasty divorce, no CPS involvement, and they used that against her. Then I had another relative that lived in a neighboring county in California who was, I think he was a fireman for the Forestry Service. And, he was, I think he was like a fire captain or something. And they told him no. And so afterwards, we went off the record, and the judge was like, hey, what's wrong with these people that you would not give them, the child? And when he would ask that question, they'd always talk about the woman who lived in town who had, a messy divorce 30 years ago. And so the judge finally says, look, even if it was a messy divorce and an ugly divorce, she didn't lose her kids. And that was 30 years ago. So why aren't you giving the child to her? It turned, in the long run, the kid was given to the relative who lived in the neighboring county. And I always believed it was because he was the only person that was most sympathetic to the social worker and her cause. and that her cause was to keep the child out of the father's custody. So, sometimes if you're going to be a relative placement, understand that when these people ask you questions, if you start defending the parent, it's likely you won't get the child. But if you start accusing the parent, they're going to use that evidence against the child. So a lot of people that I know, when the social worker says, well, hey, was the mother using drugs? The great answer is, I don't know. I wasn't there. But I'll do everything you and the judge say. Right? So, how can the social worker use that against you? Because generally in a lot of these cases, you're not witness, or there's nobody there's going to be a witness to what happened or what allegedly happened. So, they should, relatives should step forward early and often. So I get a list of 25 people and I, give that to them and say, hey, go at it. You could you could say no to one relative, maybe 2 or 3 even, but 25, I don't know if that's going to be possible. I'm looking at some of the questions that people are posting. Cynthia is asking what can be done if they have a warrant but they don't show it. They're supposed to show it and serve it on you to take your children. So, my advice is if they don't show you a warrant, they're going to have to explain some type of exigent circumstances in order to get the child or take the child. And if they don't have the exigent circumstances, they're going to have to, they might be able to be sued for a violation of your rights. Cynthia, I hope that answers your question. Let's see. Savannah, you say, I wish I was in Michigan. I'm sure somewhere in Michigan there are fine attorneys. I offer some type of consulting practice for people that are out of state. And, there's a lot of limitations to it because I'm not licensed in, for example, Michigan. But in my career, I have done a couple of cases outside the state of California. There's something called pro hac vice, which means an attorney from another state can go into a state and practice law. So for example, I did a case in Illinois, in Chicago, and I appeared pro hac vice. I did a case in Las Vegas, Nevada, and I appeared pro hac vice. Both of those cases were criminal cases, but the same can be done in juvenile dependency cases. There's a system that every state in the country uses to determine whether an attorney can appear pro hac vice. The folks that asked me to do this live event don't have a juvenile dependency case going, and as I understand it, they're not even being investigated. But they're a large family, they do have children, and so they want to know some of the things that they can do to protect themselves. So let's go over that checklist for a moment. The first thing you can do is don't talk to the social worker. I know you feel that you're smart and you're able to handle yourself, and but you're not smart enough because you're not trained in this area. Don't talk to the social worker without your attorney. Now, I'm not saying never talk to a social worker. What I'm saying is never talk to the social worker unless, right, your attorney's there with you in person or on the phone, right? So that's the first thing. The second thing is, you should probably gather, like most people do, videos and pictures of them and the child so they can show the court, if it ever became necessary, the relationship of, the child with that particular parent or with the parents. A lot of people bring me to use in hearings pictures of just the child Well, pictures of the child sometimes don't cut it. What you need is a picture of you and the child. So if you're going to do videos, and pictures, make sure that you are with the child. I know you can take pictures without the child, or with the child, or the child by themselves, but make sure you have a lot of videos and pictures of you with the child. Also, get all the information regarding the medical records and the dental records. Get all of that together, so if you ever have to use it, if a social worker comes knocking, that you can, have that readily available. Now, there's something I want to tell you guys. I get a lot of cases and a lot of calls where angry landlords or neighbors make sometimes true, sometimes false complaints against parents. And that's something that you're going to have to watch out for. I remember when I first had had children, when they were about 2 and 3 years old, which is 25 years ago, a social worker knocked at my door. And I had already been doing this type of law. And she knocked at my door, and I answered and let her in. Now, I let her in because she didn't have a warrant, but because I wanted to see and experience the way my clients experience with a social worker coming in to do an investigation. And after she left, I wondered, who could have called on my wife and I. And it turns out that I later found out, that my aunt, who sometimes babysitted the children, was going to therapy because she was in a bad marriage and there was some domestic violence in that marriage. And because of that, the therapist called DCFS and said, hey, these kids might be at risk. Now, make sure you got this right. My aunt is married to a guy and they have some type of domestic violence relationship, right? She comes over my house, not with her husband, and sometimes babysits my children, right? She's the relative, she's my aunt. She wants to be with with my kids. How in the world did the therapist for my aunt ever think that my kids were in danger because of my aunt's domestic violence relationship? So there you go. You think that people won't report you for anything? You have no idea. People report you like that, right? And guess what? It's all confidential. Confidential. So if somebody reports you, you allegedly cannot find out. You can't find out where that, it's protected by confidentiality, because California, and probably most states, they don't want to put a chill on people reporting things. So people report you sometimes and they abuse that law. Oh, you're a tenant and I want you out because of rent control or whatever, and I'm going to report you to DCFS, say that you were doing this, that, and the other, and you might be, but sometimes it's false, and then all of a sudden, social worker comes, takes your child, you lose your housing voucher because the child no longer lives with you, and voila, landlord has open apartment that he can now rent for any price under local rent control in Los Angeles. So you have to be careful, and sometimes watch your back about who and what kind of situation you can get in, because CPS is now, everybody knows about CPS. It's been in songs, rap songs, it's been on television, it's affected some stars that you and I both know. I forget Kurt Cobain's wife. I think she had some type of CPS involvement, and I think that was reported on, on the internet. Will Smith and his wife at one time had some issues with DCFS, as reported on the internet. Um, there was a show that I used to watch on Showtime called, I forget the name of the show, but the main character uh, had involvement with CPS. The social worker came in, I think, took her kid and placed the kid with, uh, the sister. And then there was that show, I don't think it's on anymore, on Fox, Empire. Well, in that case, a child and the grandchild of, one of the stars, CPS had come and taken the child and placed the child someplace else. And in that particular TV series, they made it look like it was all corrupt, the way the social worker was basically trumped up a story to take the child because they were being paid off. I wonder if art imitates life regarding that. I have heard, this happened many, many years ago. I was a court-appointed attorney, maybe 20 years ago, and 25 years ago probably. And I had a client who was accused of doing drugs. And it was true. It was true that she was doing drugs. And she was a very attractive woman, and she was a stripper. And although I never knew this, know this to be true, I suspected that there was something going on between her and the social worker so that she got her kids back faster than normal. So things like that happen. I've been involved in a civil rights lawsuit where a social worker helped a father get custody of the child so he didn't have to pay the mother child support. And the social worker did this because she was having an affair with the father, a physical relationship. And I remember when I first met this lady, she told me the story. The first thing I thought of was, okay, I believe you, but how in the world are you gonna prove this? Like, how are you gonna prove that your father's baby and the social worker are having an affair? So I told her, I take your case, but it's going to be too difficult to prove. Guess what? She already had a video of it. She had followed the father and the social worker to the motel, and I think she took, with the phone, everybody's got a phone that does a video, and I think she took pictures of them going into the hotel room, and she was right there, basically 5 feet away from them as they were coming out of the hotel, and she took pictures. She took videos of it. And we ended up getting her children back because obviously my client alleged that the social worker lied in order to help the father, who she was having a relationship with. And then after she got her kids back, we brought a lawsuit on behalf of the mother in federal court and sued for violation of her civil rights. In that particular case, the social worker ended up getting fired. And that doesn't usually happen because, that I know of anyway, because they're civil service employees. I have a case where I brought a case against the social worker for lying, and at her deposition, the way it turned out, she admitted that she had lied in papers that were filed in court. And the one thing that she didn't admit to was that some people above her were aware of this when we were trying to cover it up. That was one of my theories. But she basically took the fall, and then she got promoted. And she is still a supervisor to this day. There's an attorney who's one of the gurus in suing social workers for civil rights violations all over California, and I think he has a couple cases even in Arizona. His name is Sean McMillan. And Sean told me something or advised me of something that I do to this day. And he said, you should, when you take the depositions of these social workers, you should always videotape them. So when you take a deposition, you can always, you have the alternative to videotape it or just, have it transcribed. So now I videotape all social worker depositions. And the social worker that admitted to lying, I have the DVD of that. And I just never have posted it, but I'm going to get around before this pandemic is over, and I'm going to post that, and I'm going to let people watch that. And I think, after seeing this, you're going to realize that yes, social workers sometimes, not all the time, I'm not saying that, sometimes are a little loose with the truth. Loose with the truth. Okay. So you got to keep that in mind when you're dealing with them, because sometimes you'll say ABC and she'll report XYZ. Or you say ABC and she'll say BCD. Now, are there good social workers in life? Yes, there are. I am not telling you that there are every social worker is bad. I'm not saying that. But the cases that I'm involved with, usually involve social workers. I'm talking about the civil rights cases. Involve social workers that may have not been honest or truthful in the way they've prosecuted the case. When I started doing juvenile dependency many years ago, it was easy to sue a social worker. And then I think it was the state of Washington passed a law which gave social workers some type of immunity. And that case made it all the way up to the United States Supreme Court. And I was just sure that the court was going to rule that, giving the social worker immunity was unconstitutional. But I think it was a 5-4 decision. The court ruled that it was okay for the states to give their social workers some type of immunity, not absolute immunity, but some type of immunity. And so guess what happened? All the states passed, I don't know if all of them did, but a lot of them passed laws giving social workers immunity. And in California, they have qualified immunity. And if you're going to sue them, you basically have to prove they did something with malice, or they were malicious, or it was just intentional fraud. A couple years ago, a case went up to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, and the county, I think it was the county of Orange, was trying to argue that the social worker should also have immunity when they lied, to the juvenile court, or they lied on the stand. And I think the decision was 3-0 that social workers did not have immunity if they lied on the stand. And I think you can even find that the oral argument of that case on YouTube. And it's just painful to watch the young attorney for the county who was trying to argue this, field questions from the 3 justices, because, to me, they were just flabbergasted that the county of Orange would ask, them to decide that it was okay for someone to lie under oath. It's okay. Before running out of time here, but I want to tell you about a case I did in, actually it was Orange County, now that I think about it. I was representing some people, and the social worker wanted to take the child away from them and place the child with another foster family. But my clients were in the process of adopting the child. They had had the child for many years, I think since birth. The child was about 4 or 5 years old. Anyway, before the trial, everyone on the case was giving me shit that I was taking this case to trial because it was a loser. Okay? Everyone. And, I mentioned to the county council and to the judge before the case started, I said, my client wants to have their day in court. And, so we're going to have to go through the drill of having the trial. So we had the trial, and we get into the trial, and almost towards the end of the trial, it's time for me to cross-examine the social worker. She took the stand, and it was almost as if, how dare you call me as a witness? So it made kind of her cross-examination a little bit easier. And then I get into the cross-examination, and at some point, the social worker says, blah, blah, blah. And I know, and my clients know, that's not true. That's a flat-out lie. But I couldn't prove it. I didn't have any more witnesses to bring in. They weren't on my witness list. So I thought, well, we'll save this for the civil rights lawsuit. Maybe we'll discover how she was lying. So we finished the trial. We did oral closing arguments. And the judge says something strange. The judge says, well, I'm going to think about this over the weekend. And I'm thinking, he's going to think about it? I didn't get slam dunked on this? And so he comes back, and I get a call, and all the attorneys get a call from the judge's clerk. Clerk says, judge wants to talk to all of you. So, the next week, I go down there, and, we go into his chambers, and we sit down. And I'm wondering, how many ways did I lose this case? That's what I'm thinking. But I'm wondering, why am I there with these other two attorneys? And so the judge says something to this effect. The judge says, counsel, I found that the social worker was not credible. And I'm thinking, okay, it just wasn't me. She wasn't credible. And he says, I'm going to rule in Mr. Davis's favor unless you bring in those two witnesses that she mentioned in her testimony that can corroborate her story. And he looked around and he says, are you all right with that, Mr. Davis? And I said, well, not really, Your Honor. If you're going to rule in my favor, let's do it now. Let's not bring in any corroborating witnesses. He says, no, I want to hear. I want to hear if I read this the right way, if I'm calling this the right way. So we continue the case for a week, and they bring in the two social workers. And they put the first social worker on the stand, and the judge looks at me and says, okay, Mr. Davis, go ahead. And I'm thinking, why do I have to ask the questions to prove, that the other social worker was lying? But then I went into the cross-examination. And this lady tried to dodge every question that I had. Finally, I turned to the judge and I say, Your Honor, would you instruct the witness to answer my questions? Because it's obvious she's not answering the questions. And so the judge looked at her and he said, ma'am, I'm directing you to answer Mr. Davis's question. And she says, basically, it's not true what the other social worker testified to. You could have heard a pin drop in that courtroom. She gets off the stand, and the second worker comes in. Before the worker is even sworn in, I swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth. Before that could have happened, the social worker grabs the mic and says, it's not true, I'm not lying for anybody. Judge tells the worker, hold on, there's a process we have to go through. And so, the social worker testified that the first social worker lied about something. Needless to say, I won the case. Child remained with my client because the social worker was proven by two of her co-employees that she was not telling the truth, and proven by the judge. Judge found her not to be truthful. Do you know, I don't know if it's true today as I do this Facebook Live, but do you know nothing happened to that social worker? She continued to stay on my client's case. I tried to have her removed, and that didn't happen because the case was, almost over. But I don't think she was ever disciplined. I don't think that she was ever, lost any pay, any benefits, or otherwise. She wasn't fired, right? Now, here's a lady that lied on the stand, and she was still working for the department in Orange County for at least months after our case. And I would bet a dime that she was not ever disciplined for what she did. So that's how things sometimes happen in CPS courts. Now, we've run over time. If you guys have any questions, please email me at v, as in Vincent, at vwdlaw.com. V, as in Vincent, W as in Walter, D as in Davis, law.com. If you have any further questions, or give me a call, at the office. I answer questions like this all the time. 888-888-6582, 888-888-6582. I want to thank you for watching this evening. Someone in my office suggested that I do this every day, these questions and answer sessions, just for people who are curious about CPS issues and want to get some straight answers from someone who's very experienced and expert in this area of the law. So I want to thank all of you for watching. We'll see you next time on Facebook Live.